Good afternoon, everyone. We're really happy to be here with you at the Federal Demonstration Partnership Business Meeting. We have a very full agenda to go through, and so Alex and I are going to take a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting to walk you through what we're going to be talking about during this session. Could you share the next slide, David? Thank you so much. So the main purpose of today's meeting is for us to give you an update on all of the activities that have been going on at the FTP in alignment with the strategic planning process that we implemented in 2018 and 2019. During that process, we actually established a set of goals for phase 7. We're actually in phase 7 now. This is still the first year of that phase. And when we identified those goals, we embarked on another project, which was increasing the number of institutional members for the FTP. So we want to give you a flavor of what's been going on according to many different components of those goals. And so just to review the goals and make sure that everyone has those fresh in their mind, one of the goals for phase 7 was for us to demonstrate a positive impact on administrative efficiency and effectiveness. Another goal was to institutionalize an evaluation process so that we could be able to do a better job of determining the relevance and the impact of the FTP and begin to think about our administration of our own organization in terms of the tools that we need to implement in order to be able to do that. A third goal is to strengthen the resources and infrastructure to sustain the FTP, and particularly to sustain it in this time period of unprecedented growth with so many new members to the FTP. A fourth goal that was established as a part of the strategic planning process was to actively engage community partners, and particularly our representatives, including our administrative, faculty, and federal representatives. And so we're going to hear more about some of the things going on to accomplish that goal. Our fifth strategic goal was to tell a powerful FDP story to internal and external audiences. And that has led to, again, a number of initiatives that we're going to talk about today. So what we want to do with this session is kind of walk you through what some of the highlight activities. It's by no means a complete and comprehensive set of activities, but it will give you, I think, a very strong sense of just how much activity and progress is going on for us to accomplish our mission. Next slide, please. Alex is going to walk you through the day's activities. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, we have a lot to cover, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we tried to structure the presentation for the most part around these goals that we've been working on for the last year, and plus in more than a year, because we started gearing up for our new phase maybe 4 months beforehand. A lot to cover, but first, Michelle and I are going to have a brief discussion on our new definition of demonstration, as well as some other general operating guidelines that are helpful for all participants to understand and know how to navigate FDP. And when it comes to demonstrations, we wanted to showcase one as CUSP. It's going to be a brief overview. There's going to be a session later this week, but Aubrey's going to come and talk. We'll be giving you an overview in case you haven't been keeping up to date on that demonstration. Then we're also going to talk about based on goal 2 and being able to evaluate our effectiveness. Robert's going to discuss the evaluating working group and their activities to date. David, we've asked David to jump ahead somewhat because we believe the administrative aspects of strengthening our resources and our infrastructure lays the groundwork for a lot of these other activities. So David's going to give you some administrative updates on FDP, and also we've asked Kim to talk about our financial picture right now, so she's going to give you an update, and then we'll move on to talking about our goal 4, which is engagement, and actively engage our community partners. So we have a lot going on with that. We have a working group on enhancing federal engagement. We have a working group on enhancing our volunteer engagement experience and to broaden our numbers of volunteers. And then we also have Laurie, who's going to talk a little bit about the ERA committee and what they can do to both help, because as we know, ERA touches everything when it comes to research administration. And they have a project that's going to help kind of clarify that engagement component of FTP. And then finally, Stephanie is going to talk about our communication strategic planning effort. I think that will really help us when we talk about trying to tell the FDP story and make sure people really know what FDP is all about and what we're accomplishing. And then, as I said, as a closing, just icing on the top, we're going to ask Aubrey to talk about CUSP as one of our programmatic areas that has made a lot of progress. Next slide.
So before we jump into the administrative support.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot.
To David, I want to just remind everybody that one of the most substantial things that happened as part of the strategic planning process was to really rethink and expand what we consider a demonstration to be. It seems so fundamental because we're the federal demonstration partnership, but our historic demonstrations have really been ones in which we work with our federal partners to find areas of administrative improvement that can happen, do a demonstration to show a proof of concept, and then implement that across the funding landscape. But one of the things that we did do is expand the definition to include focus on reporting because of how much work we do, for instance, on the faculty workload survey, on family-friendly reporting, on other reports that we do for the national academies and other entities. We also play a really important role in convening parties together to be able to talk about and work through issues, much like is going to be presented today in terms of our working groups and some of what they're trying to do to improve the operational efficiency of the organization. And then finally, of course, the whole of this is to change the culture of research and make it more administratively friendly, robust, and obviously higher quality and more efficient in the process. I wanted to just point out the really methodical way in which this is happening. So of course, not only did we change what we mean by a demonstration, but we've really done a revamp in terms of the resources that are available to the Federal Demonstration Partnership community around demonstrations. I'm going to put a few links in the chat so that you can follow along, but we've actually got a website now that actually lists what we mean by different types of demonstrations. We actually have a list of current demonstrations that you can actually find online so that you can actually learn more about what the ongoing activities are. We actually have created forms now that you can fill out to request to do a demonstration. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat as well. And these are just a couple of simple examples that we want to provide to show you that as we move through what these goals are, we're trying to affect those goals by putting in place the resources to help the membership actually engage and utilize these tools to be more involved in the activities. And we think that's a very, very big improvement from how we had been approaching this before. Before we go on to the next slide, Alex, do you want to say anything more about the administrative improvements that have been going on along these lines?
Just that they're continuing. So I gave you the main site. It's in the drop down under about the FDP operations information. And then Michelle gave you some of the different sections, but we're continuing to work on our committee structures, the scope, the authority, how we decide which demonstrations to pursue, because obviously we have a lot of ideas, many grassroots ideas, and that's why the request form is right there for anybody that's interested in submitting an idea. But we also have to look at our bandwidth and making sure that what we do has that strong impact with our federal partners. So please check it out and reach out to Michelle or reach out to me if you have any questions or if you have ideas. We'd love to hear from you.
We're turning it over to David Wright.
All right, good morning, or I should say good afternoon again. My name is David Wright. I'm the Executive Director of the FTP and just want to kind of bring you up to date on some of the things that have been going on in my wheelhouse. First and foremost, many of you know we lost our administrative and program support. She decided to go to law school on us. That was Lily Andrews. The big thing here was she was only working for the FTP 25% of her job. We are now going to, we're looking for someone to fill in her role, and it will be for 100% of that position, with 40% doing just general administrative support, but then 60% being devoted to working with the committees and subcommittees and working groups and helping them get their work product out. So I think we're going to see a big improvement in the amount of support that we from our side can give to your side in terms of making sure you guys can do the job that you're trying to do. We've created a new working group called the Internal Systems Working Group. In the past, all of our electronic systems have been created in silos. So they haven't been created in a way that they talk to each other or even worked with the same technologies. So the Internal Systems Working Group is developing kind of our electronic infrastructure and standards, both inward facing and outward facing, so that all the different systems will work together. We can maximize our effort in these areas and not lose anything in trying to get these systems up and running. Mainly, we need to integrate them so we're not duplicating effort. We're not having people put their name and email address in 4 different systems rather than just one. We are also developing a request for proposals to identify a technology company that will work with us to implement our systems development and maintenance. Many of you know, most of the development and maintenance has been done by me over the years, and we're getting to a place where it really matters that things are done in a more professional manner than what I've been able to do. So that's going to be a big improvement, getting some up-to-date technology and skills involved. We're also going to purchase a tool called Thought Exchange. It's a tool that's going to be used to crowdsource ideas for demonstrations or ideas or just topics for discussion. It's not a survey tool. So a lot of people kind of have that as something in the back of their mind. So it's not being used for surveys. It's really just to crowdsource ideas. We've been using it on a test basis for quite a while now, and we'll be purchasing it very soon. Probably, we're hoping for an October 1 purchase date. We'll see. But we're going to develop a rollout plan that's going to involve training for all the core users, and those core users will then work with the different committees, subcommittees, and working groups to figure out how we can incorporate that tool with the work of those groups. Okay, meetings in hotels. As you all know, for the past more than a year and a half now, we've been meeting virtually. One of the big developments here is we did have contracts in place with hotels for all of our meetings through 2025. The main hotel that we were using, the Marriott Wardman Park, has closed. And all of our contracts with them are now null and void. So we, at this point, don't have a main meeting hotel. We do have 2 contracts in place for in-person meetings right now at the Mayflower Hotel, which is another Marriott property. And those are for this upcoming January meeting and then the May of 2022. We obviously don't know what's going to happen for the January meeting at this point in time. We don't know if we will try and have an in-person meeting, or if we'll have a much smaller type of meeting, or if there's going to be a meeting at all. We just don't know what's going to happen at this point. So to that end, it's actually kind of a blessing in disguise for us, because with everything that's happened over the past year and a half and all the things that we've been able to do virtually, plus, as been mentioned, we grew significantly in size. So now we've created a group to reimagine how the FDP meetings might look in the future. And Miriam Campo and Ron Splitgerber are here spearheading that effort, and you'll be hearing from them very shortly. Just a plug here for our profiles. On our FDP website, most of you probably already have a personal profile created. And if you don't, please go online, create one. And the link at the bottom is all the instructions on how to do that. So how to find out first if you have a profile. If you do, how you can log in and edit it. If you don't have one, it has instructions on how to create it. All this is going to help us through our membership committee, who are trying to track all the effort that our volunteers are putting in for the FDP. And for that to happen, we have to have information on our volunteers. In addition to that, we have institutional profiles, and those are kept up to date by our administrative representatives. So the official administrative reps from each institution, when they log in, they have a link to be able to update that institutional profile. And again, if you're an administrative rep and you don't know how to do this, those instructions are in that document as well. So I am encouraging everybody to please log in, check on your profile. Administrative reps, please check on your institutional profile and make sure everything is up to date. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Moreland, who is going to give you a financial update on the FDP.
Thank you, David. That was a perfect lead in, actually, because I know, as you heard David articulate some of the plans we have for phase 7, you were saying, but how are they going to pay for it? Well, I have the answers for that, and you do not have to worry. The checkbook is in good order. So let me talk to you for just a little bit. I want to provide a bit of background on our funding, which is unique on a good day, scary on a bad day. And I also want you to know about the people who help do the planning and monitoring, in addition to David. So next slide, please. So these are the members of the Finance Committee. And you can see, if we were all together in one room, I would ask them to stand, but I do want to at least read their names. Edwin Bimmel from the University of Miami, Doug Backman from Central Florida, Gunta Leaders from Rochester, Tim Reuter from Stanford, David Robinson, Oregon Health and Sciences University, and then our core of people, Alex, Michelle, Susan Sauer Sloan from Guer, and next slide, please. Did we lose my audio? Hello?
Just for a minute, you're back.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So this is just a quick little graphic to show you about the makeup of the Federal Demonstration Partnership, because that actually underpins the way we talk about our finances. On the federal side in blue, we have 10 federal agencies who were with us through phase 6 and are going with us into phase 7. On the other side in orange, we have those of us at universities, major medical centers, the recipient agencies of federal funds, basically. And we are up to 217 members. You can see that we are in phase 6, we were at 154. So we've increased by 63 members. And that's great because that has something to do with our sources of revenue. Can I have the next slide? Here we go. Just a few pots of money that all turn into the FDP operating budget. First and foremost, the background. We have federal awards made to us. Those federal awards are through the national academies, through GWIR, that Susan will talk about later, and turn into funds that can be utilized by FDP to support the goals and missions of the organization. Then we have member dues. Pardon me. Most of us pay member dues. There are some categories that do not. Those dues are deposited with the FTP Foundation rather than with the national academies. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Then the third category is meeting fees. That's basically a registration fee that you pay, pardon me, when we have in-person meetings, and there's small income coming from the expanded clearinghouse, which has to do, as you know, with maintaining data on potential subrecipients. Those two are deposited in the FTP Foundation. Now, I just want to say that we have, let me just go to the next slide, David, please. The reason I'm talking about the FTP Foundation is that the National Academies of Science, which is an organization that can receive federal funds, is not a bank. We cannot have a checking account there. We cannot set up savings and all of that. They are, in fact, an organization that itself promotes research. So we needed some way to not only deposit, but to track and monitor the flow of funds that come from outside the federal government. So in 2009, we created the FTP Foundation. Prior to that, we had basically a kind of special account at MIT, which tracked our expenses and gave us monthly reports, but which actually didn't find that to be a particularly good use of their staff time, and which obviously did not make sense for an organization that was growing as we are. So we created the foundation. You'll see I underline, no federal agency involvement is allowed. That is, federal funds may not be deposited in the foundation, and federal employees may not have a voice in the governance of the foundation. But what it does is to give us a place to deposit flexible funds that come again through dues and registration fees, so that we have a way of supporting the needs of the organization without continually drawing on the federal funds that are on deposit in the national academies. Now, we all love the national academies unless we're trying to negotiate an agreement with them. But one of the issues is that they are a grant recipient, just as each of our institutions is. And so anytime we make an expenditure, we must pay indirect costs. That becomes actually a fairly significant outlay of funds. I sound just like a member of the faculty. I hope you're proud of me. It takes away from our ability to support the organization because we're paying basically administrative and facilities fees. In addition, in years when we have excess funds so that we have exceeded our budget, we deposit those in an investment account with the goal of growing to cover about 150% of our annual operating budget. I can just say that in the last year, I have been particularly grateful that we had the foresight to do that. Not only do those funds earn interest, but it gave us a backstop when funding was so uncertain because, well, everything was uncertain. It was a pandemic, in case you hadn't heard. But that backstop is there in case, for example, we had to pay excess hotel meeting funds, refunds, if those hotels had not closed. It could have been hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we don't have an annual revenue to support that. So next slide, please. The foundation board includes three familiar names here. Michelle, Alex, and I are there by virtue of our roles in the FDP. We then serve on this separately incorporated foundation board. In addition, at the moment, we have Tim Reuter and Twyla Wrigley. Twyla's from Michigan State University, serving as members at large. And David, of course, is always there to provide advice along the way. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about the 2021 revenue side of our budget. This is the budget we're operating under right now. Our fiscal year is the calendar year, which is a convenience that's really quite nice. You see immediately the largest source of our funds are those that come from member dues. Dues are up, our collection of dues are up by almost $250,000 since 2019. I'm using 19 as a reference point because that was sort of a normal operating year as we knew it, in that we had meetings in Washington, people paid registration fees and all of that. So our goal at that point in time was to increase dues because the federal share of awards has actually been diluted as we add additional members. So our federal awards in 2021, we anticipate it being $410,000. That's pretty stable in terms of what it was in comparison to 2020 and 2019. In addition, we anticipate meeting fees of about $135,000. And the expanded clearinghouse again provides about $35,000. Again, this is budget, this is not actuals, but it gives us total revenues of just over $1,089,000. Can I have the next slide? So money comes in and then of course it has to go out. So these are our operating expenses. These too have shown some changes since 2019. Our labor costs are really fairly consistent. There are occasionally some salary increases, but not significant. We're paying office operations of various sorts. There are some foundation related costs that we paid because of the need to support that foundation in various ways. Meeting expenses, this is a really interesting one because I looked to see where we were in 2019. $6,000 is almost nothing to support 3 meetings in 2021. In 2019, our meeting expenses were almost $400,000. That's those in-person meetings. And that is because the foundation subsidizes the registration fees for members in order to take some of the pressure off. Also, those in-person meetings, including food, meeting rooms, AV, and all of that tend to be very expensive. So a substantial savings in 2021 because of virtual meetings. Then committee activities are supported generally by about $70,000. And I mentioned those indirect costs. In 21, we anticipate paying about $120,000 to the National Academies in the form of indirect costs. So a total operating budget of about $550,000. Could I have the next slide? Now, these are new expenses that we have budgeted this year that were not previously part of our plan. And the first of those is meeting cost mitigation. Because when we went into the budget planning process for 21, it was not at all clear if we would have virtual meetings or if we would try to meet in person, and if we would have to cancel hotel contracts. That you can see we anticipated that we might have to cancel in September, for which would have been about $150,000 if we canceled early. Fortunately, I guess it's fortunate, perhaps it's unfortunate that the hotel closed. So that has saved us that $150,000. In addition, I'm going to drop down to the faculty workload survey deposit because that committee is gearing up again, and we will need to make deposits with the company that will help us with this. We anticipate that will be about $100,000 this year. And then lastly is strategic planning initiatives. This is the real reason that we increased dues, and it's a reason there is such excitement among the executive committee about this year, and actually it's this phase, because we see ways that we can enhance the work of the FDP by investing in it. There has been a lack of budget actually in the past to support new initiatives, and this year we will be able to do that and going forward in the phase. David talked to you about a new program coordinator to support the activities of the meeting. David has done amazing work to put this meeting up and running with very little assistance at all. In addition, he mentioned that we are looking for a company that we can hire to do development of our software systems, our platform. And I think you will hear more in just a moment about strategic communications. That's another investment we're making in terms of website improvements in the platform, developing a real communications plan for what the FDP does and what its impact is. So add all of those together, the new expenses at a tidy number of $500,000, the operating expenses at 549, and you'll see that our expense budget is slightly over $1 million for FY 2021. Next slide, please. Great. And I'm just going to emphasize what David said earlier and what you'll be hearing, themes you'll be hearing throughout. But the organization is expanding its scope and our services and our outreach in phase 7. We grew our membership by 40%. You will see us make adjustments throughout this phase to accommodate such a significant influx of all of you out there whom I know are very pleased to be part of this organization. The focus has expanded because it is time to reinvigorate the organization and to invest in our well-being. And you can see here some of the things I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to repeat myself on those. And the last slide is just to say thank you to all of you for participating, for volunteering, for maintaining the sort of exhilaration we feel at starting a new phase. I'm not going to take questions right now because time doesn't allow, but I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
So speaking of cancellation of meetings and needing to think this through, we're going to invite our co-chairs of the Reimagining FDP Meeting Working Group to speak next.
I wonder if Miriam is online. Miriam?
Oh, she is, but her camera's not on. Maybe she's not, doesn't have a camera.
Here we go.
Hi there. I do have a camera, but I'm not sure if it's working. So I'm Miriam Campbell from FAU. As David has indicated, the Reimagining FDP meeting it is a new working group that Ron and I are co-chairing. And the intent of the group is really to reevaluate the FDP meetings in light of the hotel cancellations, in light of the increased membership. So we want to take a look at what is best for the FDP and, as the goals of the organization. Next slide. So our goals really is to take a look at what will be best for FTP, whether virtual meetings, in-person meetings, or some kind of a hybrid model. We want to identify and encourage participation in this working group with us. Ron and I will be working on a survey to survey the membership so that we have as much input from everyone as possible, and obviously evaluate the cost of in-person versus virtual meetings. Next slide, Ron.
Miriam and I consider this to be an opportunity for the FDP to increase both diversity and participation. As you can see from the slide, we have a great start for the team. I encourage you to consider joining the team to help set the stage for phase 7 meetings. Next slide, please. Here's our contact information. And again, Miriam and I will both be looking at applications for the team. I strongly encourage you to consider joining this effort for phase 7. Thank you. Next up.
All right, thank you, Miriam and Ron. This is Robert Nobles here. To talk to you briefly about our evaluation activities with the working group. Next slide. Next, okay. The evaluation working group, and thank you to Jason and Michael for the engagement survey that was circulated earlier this year. really produced a number of individuals interested in our evaluation activities. And I don't want to read the list to you, but let me at least express my appreciation and gratitude for the group. We met virtually and then had a robust conversation related to evaluation. I'm going to walk you through just a little bit of that conversation and highlight the next steps. So thank you to all of the members of the working group for sharing their sage insight, and my promise back to you that the draft document will be before you as we continue to work towards the January meeting. Next slide. Next. So when we talk about evaluation, we're really using this framework for looking at evaluation that was produced by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And it really starts with engaging stakeholders. And with the group last month, we had a robust conversation about who our stakeholders are. Just to let you know, each and every one of us who participates in FDP as a stakeholder, the groups being engaged are our federal sponsors and federal partners, our stakeholders, our institutions are part of the stakeholder groups. The leaders for each of our program and operational committees are also stakeholders. And so we have a robust set of stakeholders that extend from our individual engagement all the way to the community. We're working on describing the program, the comprehensive program of FDP, focusing the evaluation design, which I'll highlight, and highlight for you just briefly, just how would we go about gathering information so that we can get to conclusions and share those lessons learned. Next slide, which is an animation. And so when we talk about evaluation, it's really talking about process, outcome, and impact. I'll tell you that when we are trying to be frugal and diligent about our efforts, outcome and impact are where we're landing related to the focal activities of the evaluation, but we'll also look at some of the process questions because individual engagement is critical for our success. Next slide. So let me highlight for you some of the initial questions that we brainstormed about when we were meeting as a group. A primary question, which we continue to dig into, is what will be evaluated and who benefits from that information. What assessment information does FDP currently collect? We don't currently have an inventory of what information goes out. Not in totality. We know that there's a survey after the meetings, but there could be individual operational and programmatic activities as well. What aspects of our program should be considered when judging program performance? We tend to lean on phase 7 goals and objectives and the individual goals and objectives of each of the operational and programmatic committees, but nevertheless, we'll put that into context for you. What standards, what would we say something is successful? And I'll tell you, following our conversation as a working group, there are really two questions that went back related to success. What does individual member success, what does your personal success look like whenever you come to FDP and leave FDP? And then what, at the end of the year, when we're looking in reflection of what FDP has done, what would you consider that FDP was successful at the end? And so we gathered some information related to that because those elements of success is exactly what we should be evaluating. What evidence will we use to indicate that the program has performed, and what lessons learned from the evaluation will we use as continuous quality improvement? Next slide. So those are the items being considered, and what we worked on then is how should we frame questions that the evaluation will focus on. And I'll tell you, when we think about success, a couple things start to rise to the top. What are the specific program improvements that have been implemented after each faculty workload survey? And that's really digging into the areas where we describe burden to be, and this notion that we're still ranging between 40 and 43% related to administrative burden, and what are we doing about it? The second question is, what is the specific and critical role that FDP plays in government-wide initiatives? And these questions are for our stakeholders, for our individual commitments to FDP, and for the funding sources, back to the foundation, back to the academies, and we're related to what we're really doing as an organization. And I'll tell you that we're doing a lot, and we just need to capture it and be able to share that information on a regular basis. How many demonstration projects have been planned, implemented, and or completed each year and during each phase of FDP? Michelle and Alex already said that we've changed the definition of what a demonstration is, and FDP started its roots focusing on how to demonstrate that administrative activities and the burden for the institutions and back with the government will be reduced. We need to get back into the business of actually capturing that and sharing that broadly. And another question is, what activities or initiatives does FDP implement that targets or assist institutions serving underrepresented groups, including young investigators? And that question becomes one that is important to our federal colleagues that provide sponsorship to FDP. It's critical during this time that we are purposeful about our activities and that we capture them. So as next steps, the draft plan is currently being worked on and will be circulated back to the working group over the next couple of weeks. And then we plan to, after we have that draft, begin engaging stakeholders. We might use the thought exchange or other tactics that will come out of the working group conversation. But we want to get your feedback related to the evaluation plan. And I guess not to be Freudian about what will be in it, kind of this distinction between what the evaluation working group will work on and what a outside a center for evaluation at one of the FDP institutions should focus on an annual basis. So be prepared to engage in October and November related to feedback. And we look forward to providing you a comprehensive evaluation plan come January. Thank you so much. Next slide. As I turn it over to Jim and Maria to talk to you about the engagement working group. Jim?
Great, thanks, Robert. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to catch up. Certainly engagement is a big theme of what we're talking about today. And next slide. And what Maria and I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about is the Federal Engagement Working Group. As discussed, this was a major topic that was discussed in the 2018-2019 planning process, and the engagement was very broad. It was certainly about the federal partners, but also about faculty and volunteers, and you're going to hear about more of that today. So we assembled a work group. Maria and I, as co-chairs, assembled a work group that you see before you, which was a spectacular work group. It was small, it was nimble. We wanted to get this phase one, which was about planning recommendations, out of the gate quickly. And you'll hear in a moment all the great stuff that the planning document is recommending. Maria will talk about that in just a moment. But we just wanted to kind of quick start to get some thoughts out as we transition into the next part to the implementation. And so you see the names of the great individuals that helped out there: Susan Sloan, Jerry Cohen, Susan Anderson, Cindy Hope, and Julie Thatcher as our project manager. And then we were guided and we deliberately called them federal consultants because we wanted to engage them throughout the process, and we'll continue to do so. Maria representing NSF, Debbie Raffi from ONR, and Michelle Bowles and Kristen Ta from NIH. And they were party to the process and reviewed as we went through this. Next slide. So as we started this process, we had some discussion on the background, and these were some of the common elements of things that we thought that we discussed as part of the strategic planning that we knew we needed to address. Some of it was about how do we interact with existing as well as new federal partners. That second bullet about the increasingly inconsistent of the several past years, that is by no manner a condemnation of the federal partners' commitment. It's all about, as you'll hear from Maria in a moment, that there's a lot of institution and university participants. And although there's a good number of federal partners, they're still limited by focus, by mission, by objective. And that'll be one thing that we discuss along the way as to how do we maintain the great relationship, even as emergency issues like COVID or foreign influence or any of the other things that pop up and often distract us. And then the last two bullets I think I mentioned before, this is about figuring out a way to engage proactively. And in 2018, there was a federal summit with just the federal partners. And in that summit, they talked about how do you incentivize and enhance the relationship so that it's something that the federal partners want to do. They absolutely do. But how do we incentivize that and enhance that? Next slide. And so before I turn this over to Maria, as I mentioned, there's a phase one, which is what this document is all about. And it's about creating the guidelines and processes by which we engage with the federal partners. It's about defining the levels of the federal participation. We know that there's some federal partners that fund the FDP and are extremely engaged, others that really see the value in it and participate as issues come up. So how do we operationalize that as we go forward? And I think bullet 3 and bullet 6 are the critical ones about the effective and sustaining that engagement. So how do we do it in an effective, proactive, positive way? And how do we do it in a way that's sustainable even as other issues arise? Maria? Next slide, David, but Maria, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I just saw a note in the chat about the time. So I'm going to try to, talk quickly. So as Jim mentioned, we had a robust conversation with several of our federal consultants, and we asked them, well, what were some of the considerations and challenges? And as we heard from Michelle and others, FTP is a larger and more complex organization than when it began back in 1986. And back then we used to work with more consistent key players. If you attended the USDA session, the federal update, you heard that at USDA, specifically NIFA, they had an 80% staffing turnover. So not only has the number of federal staff changed, but again, the number of administrative reps has grown exponentially. And we have to keep in mind that each agency has its own internal mandates, internal priorities, and budget. So prioritizing FDP participation can be challenging. And agencies experience their own internal evolution of their systems, their processes. And oftentimes we focus within. Again, I'll use the NIFA USDA example. They have a farm bill every 5 years that rolls around that they're accountable for. That's something, as an NSF federal staff member, we don't have those, we don't have those requirements, but we may have other requirements. Next slide, please. So what suggestions did they have for us? Well, they said, be strategic about engagement because really time and attention are limited, and solicit agencies for the current topics. So as I heard you talk about thought exchange, I thought, you know what? That could be a great tool to solicit current topics from our federal partners. You have to remember that there's a new administration, there's new change in leadership, so there's a lot of change management going on. And lastly, if you heard the NSF update early and often, that's what they ask, of all of you. Well, that's something that we would ask of agency as well, is to solicit that input early and often. Next slide, please. So what were the draft recommendations for phase one? Well, one, create federal liaisons that check in at least quarterly to solicit federal needs, initiatives, concerns. The idea here is to have an FDP member, it could be an administrator, it could be a faculty, that checks in with a federal agency on a regular or periodic basis. The next idea, which I have to say I personally love, and I've tried these, are these opportunities to create pop-up listening sessions for any current federal initiatives. And I've had 3, I think, over the last few months. And I can't tell you how valuable it is when, you're working on some initiative or process, and you need the perspective from a grantee institution. So this has worked really well, and I highly encourage that, because from a federal perspective, we want to hear from you. We want your input on these systems, these policies, these suggestions before we actually roll them out. So I can't say enough how well how good these are. Third idea was to provide agency update templates. You just heard the federal agency updates. What's important to you? Is it more important to talk about, the latest FOA that's coming out, or what other priorities an agency has? So I think we'd like to try to give more guidance on these templates. And the other idea was to create, and it says here, create agency website. And we're not suggesting that you recreate the federal agency's website, but actually, let's take the case of NIH. If you're looking for, that presentation on cost sharing or whatever the topic is, you have to go into first you have to know where to look on the FDP website. You have to go into the agenda. You have to remember, well, what year was that topic presented? And then you have to kind of search through it. So the idea is that, somehow on the FDP website, you'd have a devoted area for these, for the various federal partners, with links to their previous presentations, and maybe links to their website, or maybe links to their, key staff. So, you have institutional profiles, why not have agency profiles? The next is to consider different levels of federal engagement. We have some agencies that have been knocking on FDP's door and saying, well, we really don't fund research, but we are interested in what FDP does. So we'd like to engage in some way. And then lastly, continue to evaluate opportunities and try to seek meaningful types of engagement, whether that's a working group, committee participation, a formal demonstration project. And I have to tell you, I love that we've expanded the definition of demonstration, because that creates a lot more opportunities for everyone. Next slide, please. And then the last is to continue vetting with our partners. Tomorrow, Jim and I are presenting with the faculty committee group. And then the next step would be to develop this phase 2 implementation plan and to execute. And lastly, I'd just like to end by, just giving my gratitude to Jim, for all of his hard efforts as co-chair, and also to Julie, who's been fantastic. I think we should clone her, and everyone should have a Julie Thatcher, as a project manager, because she's that good. And also wanted to thank Susan, Jerry, Susan, Cindy, and Debbie, Michelle, and Krista for all of their participation and input. So thank you.
Thanks, Maria. And I think we'll turn it over to Michael and Jason now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, continuing along the theme of engagement, we're going to give a report out on our working group on volunteer engagement and nominations. And next slide, David. I'll be really brief. This next slide here is really kind of our initial working charge, and you can see several things that have been in motion and in place being handled by not only this working group, but other committees. I guess if I had to point one out, it would be the very bottom bullet, working with committees and working groups to develop standard practices in how individuals are included. And that's really something that we took some time to try to really dig into and develop. And Michael will be sharing with all of you the primary data in just a moment. Next slide. So here's to set Michael up, and then I'll come back on for the 7 recommendations that we have for consideration. The survey that we're talking about is not the member-wide survey that everybody completed. And thank you to all of you who completed that survey. Those surveys have been distributed to the chairs of our committees, subcommittees, and working groups. And now we have a database of your interests. And you will be hearing, or probably have already heard, from some of those co-chairs. This was actually a second survey, a targeted survey to our co-chairs, and it was very brief, but it was a survey focused on how committees range in size, how often they meet, the types and roles and scopes of way they are selected and rotated, including how diversity may or may not be included in that. And we had an 82% response rate to the survey. So 92 surveys were sent out. We had a great response rate to that. Interestingly, of those 76 that responded, 59 are unique individuals, because we have many people that serve in co-chair roles in more than one committee, subcommittee, or working group. Responses were received that covered every one of our committees, subcommittees, and working groups. So with that, I'll ask to change to the next slide, which I know is going to be a data slide, and Michael will cover the basics of what we found from this survey.
Thank you, Jason. And before I get started, I want to thank Stephanie Scott, Lynette Arias, and Jean Herman for all their help with both the surveys and making sure that we got this out, and we got such a high response rate too. We were trying to figure out in these questions, trying to get a better sense of like, how can we run things in a more effective way, like so that you as an individual contributor to FDP might feel more welcome, might be able to get things done. So we're really trying to get a sense from the different committees how they already are operating. We saw a lot of different ranges about the sizes of our working groups, whether from 2 to 60 people. And then we also got feedback about what ideal sizes would be for these committees. And there was sort of a delta between the current size versus what the preferred size of a group would be. Can we go to the next slide? So oftentimes we find that groups are meeting outside of regular FTP meetings, which I think speaks to everyone's commitment to what we're trying to accomplish in those working groups and subcommittees. But of our 76 responses, 84%, 64 reported that the group met outside of regular FTP meetings. Next slide. This is I think a key thing to think about leadership rotation. 92% reported that there was no regular rotation of leadership in our different groups, and 55% were in favor of developing some type of FTP-wide parameters or recommendations for how you think about that. I think this is a really important tension that we have to think about, is this comment that we have. Having standards around this will allow a nice balance between longevity and historical knowledge and bringing in new ideas and people. I know it, particularly for those of us who have been in research administration for a while, letting go or being able to do that knowledge transfer can be challenging. So how can we get to that? We also dove into asking folks about diversity and inclusion. And I just want to point out that this note down here, it wasn't meant to call people out for their behaviors or what's happening, but really to sort of think about what diversity is for FTP. And there's different types of diversity, right? There's institutions. We think a lot about small research universities, emerging research institutions, to private, to public, right? Whether we have faculty or admins or technical reps engaged, our gender diversity, Someone from California, I want to see all those West Coast schools more engaged in FDP, but thinking about that geographic diversity and also ethnic and racial diversity. And we actually got fantastic responses with regards to our questions here. Let's go to that next slide. So of the 76 responses on the question about diversity, we heard 14.5% thought about institutional diversity. The largest one, I think this speaks to like how many of us have engaged in the emphasis in FTP about admin reps, faculty versus technical. The largest thing that we think about in terms of diversity is about that representative FTP rep diversity. 8 responses said they think about gender diversity. 19 of our responses, 25, had thoughts around geographic diversity, and then 11.8% thought about ethnic racial diversity. Let's go to the next slide. I think this first comment here about we'll take anyone who's interested in helping is one of the sort of what's really exciting about FTP is like you can raise your hand and suddenly you're it. So how do we recruit? Oftentimes it just comes from initiative. And there's also in responses like you see here that there's a real commitment among many to create more diverse spaces within FTP. Let's go to that next slide, please. So, and this is another difficult thing. When you have a small N, when you're not seeing many volunteers step forward, how much are you going to fight for additional folks to participate? When you have this example here of we only received 2 volunteers, but we're still making good efforts to welcome all to participate. There was just a lot of very thoughtful comments similar to this comment here about that effort of great ideas, but how do you actually staff it? Let's go to the next slide. Some of the things that were echoed previously, and it's great to hear some of the investments that we're going to have is, can we have a better website, get that organizational administrative support. You heard it here in today's presentation. That's just around the corner. And then there was also questions around how can we improve the process around onboarding and orientation. And let's go to that next slide. Let's hand that back to Jason.
Okay, thanks, Michael, for going through that data. And really what we'd like to summarize are 3 basic take-home messages and then 7 recommendations for the executive committee and our membership to consider. But, groups have varying practices in how they organize. And we believe that heterogeneity is likely needed and beneficial, but there needs to be some thought to some FDP-wide guidance that might be helpful. Survey respondents observed challenges with sustained volunteer engagement. We saw that time and time again, particularly in the open comments. And while some groups have or are developing procedures for selecting membership, many are open to all interested and or feature self-selection with limited guidelines to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion. So here are our 7 recommendations for consideration. On the next one is, if you can move to the next slide here. Recommendation 1, have each committee, subcommittee, and working group formally establish a preferred committee size. That could be 12 to 15, it could be 20 to 25, it could be whatever the need really is, but we want each committee to best fit their unique needs. This kind of then dovetails nicely, I think, into recommendation 2, which is that for those committees that feel that larger committees are necessary, somewhere in the 20 to 60 range. We did see one committee that was 60, and they had a thoughtful comment as to why they're that large. But we would like to see for those larger committees a process for how leadership roles and functions are established and maintained. We think that would be very helpful and also provide some continuity, as we said, from a historical perspective to welcoming in new people. Recommendation number 3, require all committees, subcommittees, and working groups to establish a regular rotation for the group or leadership of that group in these larger committees that allows for a balance of new members and continuity. These 2 examples that are in red are not meant to be overly prescriptive. These are truly just examples. So, for example, committee with a target size of 15 may consider having 3-year terms, renewable once, that rotate 1/3 of the committee at the May FDP meeting. Another example could be for a committee with a target size of 50, have 5-year terms for the small leadership team of 5, including the chair and co-chair that will rotate 1 person per year that will help do a lot of the logistics in between the meetings. So those were just a couple examples to maybe, get people thinking about what this might look like. Next slide. Recommendation 4, encourage each committee, subcommittee, or working group to strive for membership diversity as valued by FDP. And we talked about what those values are, with acknowledgement that flexibility is necessary and there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I think we had a very thoughtful conversation with the executive committee about what this might look like, how we would even get that data. And I think that there needs to be a lot more thought put into this. But we did think that there was some low-hanging fruit, particularly on some of the things that we do have access to, like institutional size, geographical distribution, representative designation, recognizing that gender and ethnicity and race will require some more thought as to how those profiles would be able to be pulled. Recommendation 5, encourage each committee, subcommittee, and working group to meet outside their regularly the 3 FDP meetings for intervals that make sense for their needs and their activities. I guess the point there being that we heard was, if you're only meeting at the meetings, how valuable is the activity, and is there things that can and should be done in between the meetings? Next slide. Our recommendation number 6, regularly visit the committee, subcommittees, working groups to ensure efficiencies and be prepared to sunset, merge, or elevate working groups. So I was talking with Michelle and Robert, as we all serve as VPRs, and one of the hardest things that we deal with is sunsetting centers and institutes and things that have had their day, and maybe there needs to be some new investments and new energy put in. A good example of this is this working group right here. It served its purpose of trying to evaluate, collect some data. We found that as we did this exercise, there were some redundancies between the volunteer engagement nominating working group that we did and both the membership committee and the evolving infrastructure committee. So we're going to practice what we preach, and we're recommending that this working group be dissolved and incorporated into one of those more longstanding efforts. I think working groups can be very effective, but they have to have an end date and a sunset. And then finally, recommendation number 7, institutionalize FDP organizational efforts and infrastructure, and particularly professional staff to assist with committees, subcommittee, and working group activities. We're a very lean organization. I think we heard that in some of the earlier conversations. And when we talked with people, interviewed people, and really dug into the data, we may be a little too lean. And a lot of people are volunteering and putting in enormous amounts of time, where at other professional societies of our size, there's a stronger professional staff that helps with some of those activities. We think that we'd like to have higher impact interactions with those volunteers and make better use of their time. So those were our 7 recommendations, and I think we're going to have more time for some Q&A at the end of this. So with that, we're going to turn it to the next slide and turn it over to Stephanie Scott, who will talk about communications. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so I'm the chair of the communications committee. I am from Columbia University, and I'm literally going to go at lightning speed here. So next slide, David. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about what our committee does. It includes, but is not limited to, developing and maintaining an overall communication and outreach plan for the FDP as a whole. And I'll be giving an update on what our efforts are with regards to strategic planning. We set up style guidance. We provide oversight and direction of the FDP website. We edit and approve publications that are going to have broad viewership. So for example, the faculty workload survey or a white paper usually comes to our committee, and we'll review it to ensure that it's representing the FDP appropriately. We compile and disseminate high-level meeting summaries. So hopefully you have been enjoying what we put in place about 1.5 years ago. Our group of volunteers issue those quick meeting summaries, and we'll have one after the September meeting. So when you ask that question, how do I get the slides? Where am I going to get the information? All the slides and the videos are going to be posted on our website. Look right on the homepage, thefdp.org. And hopefully soon after the meeting, there will also be a summary of quick summaries of each session so that you can take that document to your leadership and other stakeholders at your respective organizations and give them a high-level overview of what took place during the meeting. And you can also decide whether to dig deeper into the details. So I'm going to talk a bit about the high-level meeting summaries in a moment. And of course, general marketing and outreach. And so next slide, please. Our committee has, I would say, approximately over 50 volunteers that have either expressed interest in our committee or are actively working on our various working groups and committees. And so I know we recently have from the volunteer interest survey some new folks that are interested in getting involved with the communications, and certainly feel free to reach out to us at communications@thefdp.org if you are interested in doing work with us. And so I just want to highlight our current working groups. Oop, nope, go back. Where'd you go? Okay. So we are going to be working on a FTP communication strategic plan. Jennifer Taylor from Tennessee Tech University and myself will be leading that effort. George Utz from the University of Cincinnati is our faculty liaison to ensure that the faculty voice is included in our current activities. Benjamin Mullen, Jeff Petsis lead those wonderful quick session summaries of they lead those efforts. We have approximately 20 volunteers assisting and volunteering, writing those summaries. Barbara Gardner from Tufts and Sarah White from the University of Tennessee Health Sciences Center. They lead the marketing and outreach efforts, for example, brochures and other marketing materials. Sheila Chapler from Stanford and Talise Daly from Johns Hopkins lead the policy style guidance working group. And so soon we should have new policies and guidance documents related to style guidance for writing to ensure a consistent voice, a social media policy, as well as use of name. Rasha Abed and Jamie Sprague lead our website working group, and our website working group ensures that all the committees and subcommittees keep their content up to date on our website. We provide them guidance in terms of what the minimum amount of information should be included in our website. But we're going to be talking about our website in a moment, because I certainly heard the previous work groups make recommendations about our website, and I agree with you. We're going to be talking about that. And then finally, Maura Harris, who's with Johns Hopkins, is what we call our infrastructure committee liaison. And so she keeps our communications committee up to date regarding project management tools and support. And she does this effort with Denise Moody over on the infrastructure committee. And so what they're doing is they are evaluating and documenting all the various project management tools that are available to the FDP. So for example, Thought Exchange, which you heard David talk about earlier, as well as other tools, and the plans for training and outreach and making those tools available and making people aware that they exist. So next slide, please. So let's talk about what's on the Phase 7 strategic plan, where communications comes into play. Well, Goal 5, it's tell a powerful FDP story to internal and external audiences. We heard a lot about engaging stakeholders today, engaging our federal partners, engaging new volunteers, rotating volunteers. So as part of the strategic plan, what is part of that is to develop targeted communications directed at federal agencies that explain why they should initiate or increase their involvement in FDP and how involvement will benefit them. So this is the communication side of the house. So all that wonderful work that Jim and Maria and Julie did with the Federal Engagement Working Group, all those great recommendations, how timely. We're going to take all that great work that they did and engage them or our partners in that working group as we go forward with our strategic communications plan. So how do we implement and how can we develop these targeted communications with our federal partners? Also, as part of the strategic plan was to increase participation in the communications committee. When the strategic plan finally got finalized, which was, I believe, in the fall of 2019. So almost 2 years ago, it was around 2 years ago. I remember the minute the strategic plan got finalized, we made a really concerted effort to find more volunteers for the communications committee. And then we also have our wonderful volunteer engagement survey where we have identified new people to join our committee. So we've definitely met that part of the plan, where I would say we were a really small group that really expanded into our working groups that you saw before. So how are we going to tell a powerful FDP story? So, and what is the FDP story? How do we communicate our accomplishments? How do we keep our members as well as non-members and other stakeholders up to date on all the activities that are going on at the FDP? And there are so many demonstrations and initiatives happening. And then how do we communicate with each other? Well, one is to develop a comprehensive communications and marketing plan for the FDP and prepare and update an annual compelling story in brochure or online format. And then finally, summarize our key accomplishments and upcoming activities and the benefits of joining and participating with the FDP. And so as part of the plan, it does state that we will explore options for getting expert professional support. And I can tell you, Jennifer Taylor and I did interview marketing and PR firms, 5 of them, to identify a vendor for us to work with in order to help us, real marketing experts, develop our communications plan. And so we're in the process right now of finalizing that contract with the vendor. We're not quite there yet, but soon. And also, once we go through the whole communication strategic plan, because that comes first, then we're going to tackle our website. And so whatever comes out from our strategic plan, and I saw wonderful recommendations coming up from both the federal engagement group and the volunteer interest group about making strategic changes to our website, which were great. And so again, that's all going to be helpful information once we go through our communication strategic plan and we're ready to tackle the website. So next slide. And so to accomplish over the next year our communication strategic plan and to develop a brand new website that's visually appealing and easy to navigate. And so if you have any questions or you're interested in volunteering in this committee or have suggestions, please feel free to contact us at communications@thefdp.org. And so I am now going to hand it over to, let's show the next slide. It should be Lori Schultz, right? Yep. Representing the chair, of the ERA committee.
Thank you, Stephanie. I don't know if it'll let me turn my video on. Hi, I'm Lori Schultz, the University of Arizona, and I am the university co-chair of the ERA committee. My federal co-chair is David Saunders from the National Science Foundation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what the ERA committee is doing for phase 7 to restart and refresh. And before I do that, I want to take you back to the 90s when we had stacks of paper, used fax machines to review proposals. We had Fastlane in Netscape, and we had to run to the airport to catch the latest FedEx time to get those proposals off to the NSF or wherever else. And that's back when the ERA committee was formed. The ERA committee was formed at a time when Fastlane and other systems were our very first introduction to electronic systems for research administration. Next slide, please, David. But a lot has really changed since then. Right now in 2021, research administrators don't need the same level of technical support on a new system as they did when we first started. When Fastlane was new, it's very different. But by the time, Assist or grants.gov came along, everyone had a pretty solid set of skills for dealing with these technical systems and some facility with using them. We also have, as you've heard multiple times over this presentation, the FDP has many new institutional members. And one of the things we're thinking on the ERA committee is how do we leverage their willingness to participate and their expertise? And our technology, research admin technology, is about system design, data interoperability, and integration of systems wherever possible. Instead of having a group that helps new research administrators who've never seen these systems before learn how to use them. We've pivoted to where things are a little more complicated, talking about user interface design, how we get the data and how we reuse it and integrate the systems whenever we can. So next slide, please. To that end, the ERA committee has been holding strategy sessions over the past couple of months to basically hold on to what works and honor the work of the past for this group, and to let go of the things that don't work. Try to reframe our purpose and mission, define who we think we are in the context of FTP in phase 7, and to reevaluate and reinvigorate our membership. Next slide, please. So what we're thinking of, and this is subject to executive committee approval, and what we're contemplating as we are right in the middle of these strategy sessions, is a brand new name. ERA is very 90s. We've done a lot of workshopping with a facilitator and have come up with a proposed new names, and that is the RSTC, the Research Systems Technology Committee. And that we would have a new purpose in advocating for, optimizing, and integrating technology solutions across the life cycle of the research enterprise. What we do is standards, best practices, quantifying impacts of proposed regulatory changes to our systems, and conduct demonstrations under that new definition. We also have a new commitment to ensure our membership reflects the diversity of FTP institutions, because it traditionally has not done that. And that's one of the things that we really want to do moving forward. Next slide, please. I think this is the last slide. And my tense is wrong on this last bullet. You can tell by it saying that it was on Friday the 24th. It is on Friday the 24th, which is our final session. Goes to show I don't really know what day it is anymore. We'll be reviewing and consuming the output from our facilitator, defining our committee structure and membership going forward, including what we think the appropriate size of the group is. How do we ensure that we're balancing diversity of the kinds of different institutional members there are at the FTP, and then figuring out what are our priority projects going into the end of this calendar year and into 2022. Like, what is a good demonstration for the new RSTC? What is a good big win that we could have over the next year and a half or so? And then, of course, using the work of the volunteer group, how do we engage the volunteer community in those efforts? And that's it for me. And I think I might be last.
We have one more. We have Aubrey to talk about CUSP.
Hi there, I'm Aubrey and I'm from the University of Washington. I'm one of the co-chairs of the CUSP project along with Sally Thompson-Iritani. As Alex had mentioned earlier in the presentation, we wanted to highlight one of the demonstration projects that the FTP is supporting that's had a lot of really good energy and momentum lately. So I hope to give you a little bit of a flavor of that over the next 5 minutes. So the CUSP project is a multi-institutional initiative to develop an online repository where participating institutions can share standard procedures that are used in animal care protocols. And we hope that this project will ultimately relieve administrative burden both for researchers as well as ICOOCs by making it easier to prepare high quality animal care protocols. We're also hoping that this will increase interinstitutional communication and ultimately improve animal care by making procedures that have proven to meet the standards of IACUCs, veterinarians, and researchers available to anyone that might want to use them. And this effort has been well supported by our federal partners, and it's actually included as one of the burden reducing initiatives outlined in the 21st Century Cures Act. Next slide, please. So the working group that supports this project is nothing short of amazing. Every time I put together slides for an FDP meeting and kind of reflect over the progress that we've made since the last meeting, is nothing short of humbling. Since its inception, 62 different institutions and more than 100 individuals have contributed to this project, which I really think is phenomenal and just a testament to the energy and excitement that our community has about developing this tool. So our working group is currently organized into 4 teams. So we have the education and outreach team, which is led by Michelle Brott and Scott Burry, and they're really focused on just kind of outward communication. So just putting the word out there about CUSP and how it can be a benefit to institutions that have animal research programs. We also have the help desk, which is being led by Elaine Kim and April Ripka, and they are kind of your first line of communication. So they're helping new institutions get onboarded into the CUSP site, and will answer any kind of questions or concerns that users have about the site. We also have a quality control team, and they're really focused on just maintaining data integrity within the system. This team is led by Eva McGee and Cindy Rosenblatt, and they'll perform tasks such as reviewing procedures that are flagged by our user community, and surveying our user community about what's working and what's not working within the system, so we can identify potential enhancements down the road. And then last but certainly not least, we have the technical systems team, which is headed up by Mark Nath. This team is really focused, or will be focused on post-implementation support. So doing things like tracking bugs that are identified and the fixes for those bugs, tracking enhancement requests, and maybe even developing some technical documentation for single sign-on and application programming interfaces that we have planned for future development. Our working group also has some wonderful federal partners who are so happy that they've been just very active and engaging with this project and providing really great guidance for us. So we have Axel Wolf and Nira Gopi from OLA, Kara Clark from the USDA, Alice Wong and Marissa Wolf from the VA. So a big thank you to all of them. Next slide, please. So I put together this timeline just to give you a sense of where we've been and where we currently are with the project. So the working group was initially formed back in March of 2017. We got to work right away and put together a project proposal and submitted that to the FTP Executive Committee, which was approved that October. We then spent probably about the next year and a half really digging in and discussing site design and function. And those conversations culminated in putting together a site requirements document that is currently supporting our development efforts. So we began development of our beta site probably in the later half of 2019. And the build and testing of that site was completed this past May. We're currently in the process of transitioning that site over to a more modern technology stack. And the goal of that really is to provide better support and maintenance of the site as we move forward. And as you heard briefly before, that also kind of fits really nicely into FTP's overall plan for their internal systems by making the CUSP site more easily able to partner with other FTP tools, such as the membership database. And so kind of with this phase of development, we're again taking very iterative, agile type approach to development, and we hope to start user testing coming up in October. And if you'd like to hear more about what we've been up to with this project, we have a session coming up on Thursday at 11 a.m. and we'd love to have you join us. And I also just wanted to put a plug out there for volunteers. More hands really do make light work. So I know our help desk team, quality control team, and technical systems team would love to have some more members. So if you're interested in volunteering, please do reach out. Our email is just cusp@thefdp.org, and I'll just put that in the chat for everybody in case anyone's interested in joining us. And so with 1 minute left, I will hand that back to Alex because I think we might have a question or two to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Aubrey. Thanks, everybody. I think that this was a great update session and we have 1 minute to spare. We have one Q&A comment, just letting Jason and Michael know that they really like recommendation number 3, which is essentially to place some level of rotation for committees. I think that, our executive committee has talked about that and it's obviously something that needs to be looked at and should be implemented to the extent that we have volunteers that are waiting and eager to join these committees. So we're just keep looking for our volunteers. If we have anything else, I think that's the only question. I don't know if anybody else, I mean, I guess we're right at 5. So as always, as usual, reach out to us if you have questions, if something occurs to you. Then Michelle,
Yep.
did you want to kind of give a preview for tomorrow? Well, we have an all comers happy hour in a half an
I was
hour.
just going to say that if you want to continue the conversation about this and other activities of the day, please do jump into the happy hour that starts at 5:30. Tomorrow we begin right at 11 o'clock again, and we have a full slate. You can find the agenda on the FTP website. And we really look forward to your engagement throughout this week. The remainder of the meeting is going to be more of our typical business of the organization. And so if you're interested in any of the issues that have been talked about here, many of them are going to be the subject of much deeper dives in the coming days. We really appreciate you and your time, and that you have joined us this afternoon, and we hope to see you again in about a half an hour.